Hey guys, this will be a quick video just summarizing Act 2 of Romeo and Juliet and also taking a look at some of the key moments. All of these lines on the website My Shakespeare, which offers a bunch of awesome tools. And the prologue to Act 2 is so short that we'll just go through the whole thing. So the chorus begins in the prologue and says, "Now old desire doth in his deathbed lie, and young affection gapes to be his heir." Both old desire and young affection, they contrast and they're being personified. So old desire is dead in his deathbed. That's connected to Rosaline. Young affection, meaning new affection, that's talking about the sort of love that Romeo has now, or the affection he has for Juliet. Continuing on to the third line. That fair for which love groaned for and would die, with tender Juliet matched, is now not fair. So basically, Rosaline isn't fair anymore, aka beautiful, because Juliet is so much better. Now Romeo is beloved and loves again, meaning he's in love, but he's loved back this time. Alike bewitched by charm of looks, but to his foe suppose he must complain, and she steals love's sweet bait from fearful hooks. Being held a foe, he may not have access to breathe such vows as lovers use to swear, and she, as much in love, her means much less, to meet her new beloved anywhere. Sort of what's going there is just saying, they're foes, they're enemies, them being foes of each other, they don't have the accessibility to see each other. It's going to be tough for them to see each other, to breathe such vows that lovers use, to swear their love to each other. For Juliet, she has much less means basically to see Romeo. She's younger and in a more sort of controlled by her parents maybe situation. But finally, it's telling us, the prologue, the chorus is telling us that passion lends them power, time means to meet, tempting extremities with extreme sweet. So it's sort of like their love will overcome the fact that they have these barriers. Act 2, Scene 1 is very short. This is right after the party. Benvolio and Mercutio are leaving the party and they don't know where Romeo is. Romeo ends up staying at the Capulet's house. He's basically trespassing. He says at the beginning, "Can I go forward when my heart is here?" So he can't move forward. He can't go home. He's saying he is like stuck here because of his heart. And he ends up staying, and here you can see the stage directions. He climbs the wall into the garden. So that's where he sort of like goes back into the Capulet property. Benvolio is calling out for his cousin Romeo, my cousin Romeo. And Mercutio ends up sort of making fun of the fact that Romeo is, still so in love with Rosaline. There's a moment here where he says, right here, he says, "I conjure thee by Rosaline's bright eyes." And that's a moment of dramatic irony, because they're trying to get Romeo's attention by bringing up the girl who they think he's in love with, which is Rosaline. But by saying, "I'll conjure you," meaning bring you forward, by bringing up Rosaline's eyes, that actually won't work. He's over Rosaline. Little do they know, he's now seeking out Juliet. Benvolio, says, "And if he hear thee, thou wilt anger him." He's saying Romeo will be angry if he hears you sort of making fun of him. And basically, the scene ends with them realizing they're not going to find Romeo. Let's just go home. And that's sort of where the scene ends. It's in vain, they say, to seek him. Act 2, Scene 2 is maybe the most famous scene in the play, and it definitely has some of these lines that are culturally so important and that people use all the time, and there's all these lines that are made reference. A lot of people call Act 2, Scene 2 the balcony scene, which if we scroll through this, you'll see it mentions a balcony nowhere here, but so many playwrights have adapted the play and chose to have Juliet speaking from a balcony. All it says when we get there is Juliet appears at the window. So a lot of people have just taken that to be a balcony. It's more romantic. Act 2, Scene 2 begins with Romeo saying about Mercutio. He says, "He jests at scars that never felt a wound," meaning he's making fun of me, but he's never felt my pain. And then he sees a light coming from Juliet's window, and he says, but soft, meaning quiet. So he's sort of telling himself quiet. He says, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. And that's one of the most famous metaphors in all of literature. He's comparing Juliet to the sun and her window to the east, and her appearing at the window is this really big moment for him, basically. And he's speaking to himself here. Juliet doesn't hear this. This is a soliloquy. And he says, arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief. Saying the moon is envious of her, the sun, because it's so much bigger and brighter. There's a lot of light and darkness here. Light and darkness are pretty big motifs in the play, too. In a lot of senses, Romeo and Juliet can only meet when it's dark, when it's nighttime, and that becomes really important. It's also key to note that they're sneaking around, and that might be fatal because their friends and family are never really clued into what's going on, and that is a pretty costly mistake. But at any rate, Juliet is always for him basically compared to lightness. When Juliet finally starts speaking, she's speaking to herself, and Romeo is basically just creeping and eavesdropping. And he has all this very flowery language, and he's talking about how beautiful her eyes are, and he wishes that at one moment he says, I could be a hand right here. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek. So he wishes, like, she's going like this. She's got her hand on her chin, and Romeo wishes he was a glove on that hand. So he's just, again, more adoring her, sort of all for physical things, which whenever I talk to kids about, is this true love or not, I hear really mixed results. And a lot of people bring up all of these things that Romeo is attracted to seem to be physical. And that might be sort of characteristic of young relationships. But other people do say, they get married really quickly. It might be real love. It might be real passion. Anyway, when Juliet starts speaking, she says, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" And notice here, wherefore is why. A lot of times people see this line and they think it's Juliet saying, where are you, Romeo? It's not. She's saying, why are you, Romeo? Because she wishes he could be someone else, because in any other scenario, she'd be able to be with him. She can't be with him because he is a Montague. And that's why she says, deny thy father and refuse thy name, or if thou wilt not, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. So basically, if you won't renounce your family, Montague, then I'll renounce my family, the Capulets. And I think this whole thing here is so relevant today for people that come from either different religions or different cultures or states or backgrounds who still find a way to fall in love with somebody who's different than them, but that can be a barrier. And that's I think always been and probably always will be such like a relevant conundrum or problem that people will face, and it's one that they're facing here. If not, it's one of the most famous examples of that predicament that so many people end up identifying with. Loving somebody who, for whatever reason, whether it's big or small, it proves an obstacle because of where they're from or who they are or who their family is. Romeo is having this internal battle, so it says aside. That means he's speaking like to himself. She doesn't hear it. And he's saying to himself, shall I hear more or shall I speak at this? So he's sort of deciding, should I let her know I'm here? And she continues on pretty much saying, 'tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belong to a man. So she's getting really philosophical here, just saying Montague's just a word. That doesn't define you. And she says here, it is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belong to a man. Be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. That's a really famous line right there. And it's a great point. A rose, whether it's called, something else, whether it's called a rose or a churnel snap, it would still smell the same and look the same. It's still a rose. And she's saying, so Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes, which means owns. So Romeo ends up popping out and saying, I take thee at thy word. So he's basically saying like, hey, I love you. Here I am. Juliet ends up being really scared in these lines and freaked out. Romeo in these lines is sort of saying like, I can't tell you who I am, and he's saying that because he doesn't want to like own up that he's a Montague and she can't be with him. But when she hears his voice, Juliet says, "My ears have not yet drunk 100 words of thy tongue's utterance, yet I know the sound. Art thou not Romeo and a Montague?" So she recognizes who he is. And Romeo is being all cute, and he says, "Neither fair maid if either thee dislike." So he's saying like, I'm not Romeo if you don't want me to be. I'll skip through a lot of this, but there's a lot more back and forth. Eventually, Juliet is sort of complaining to Romeo that, not complaining, but she says to him, "Hey, you overheard my vows of love towards you, but that was a private moment that you sort of overheard." And so she's playing hard to get in a sense, where she's basically trying to say like, "Hey, I'm not that forthright or open with people that I just met." But what ends up happening is things escalate pretty quickly, and they end up making plans to be married. I paused the video and skipped ahead a little bit. This is line 142. So right here, Juliet says, "3 words, dear Romeo, and good night indeed. If thy bent of love be honorable, thy purpose marriage, send me word tomorrow by one that I'll procure to come to thee. Where and what time thou wilt perform the rite, and all my fortunes at thy foot I'll lay." So she ends up saying to him, I'm going to send you somebody to arrange our marriage. And she pretty much says, like, if you're honorable, if you really do love me, if you want to get married, let's send word tomorrow and orchestrate it. And that's interesting because just earlier, Juliet was saying to him, "I have no joy of this contract tonight. It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too like the lightning which doth cease to be ere one can say it lightens. Sweet good night." So she's saying like, yo, we're moving way too quickly. Right here, she says, "This bud of love by summer's ripening breath may prove a beauteous flower when next we meet." So she's saying like, let's let this bud, let's let this grow. It can turn into something. But as of right now, she's saying it's too quick. We're moving quicker than lightning. But Romeo gets a little bit pushy, right? He says, "Will you leave me so unsatisfied?" And that eventually leads to them deciding in this scene that they're going to get married. In Act 2, Scene 3, we meet Friar Lawrence. He's really similar to Juliet's nurse in terms of relationship comparisons. Juliet is close with her nurse. She confides in her nurse. The friar is that type of a character for Romeo. So the friar confides, or Romeo confides in the friar and has a pretty open relationship with him. But Romeo doesn't tell his parents sort of what is happening in his life. And in Scene 3, it starts in Friar Lawrence's cell. He's a priest, by the way. A friar is like a priest. And so he's also a pretty earthly man. And he has this long opening monologue where he's sort of talking about sort of the earth and how things in earth there's a duality. So they have healing powers, but also the power to kill us. We eat food from the earth, but we're also buried there when we die. Let's see. He says some things like, "The earth, that's nature's mother, is her tomb. What is her burying grave? That is her womb." Let me see. There's moments, I think, here where he's talking about different herbs and stones that have medicinal power. And anyway, yeah, right here, medicinal power. This is sort of a concept that's going to come back. It's just a good thing to log in the back burner that he has sort of medicinal experience in addition to being a man of God. But yeah, he's an interesting monologue to take a look at more closely. But the key thing that happens here is Romeo ends up showing up, saying, "Good morrow, father." Friar Lawrence is really stunned. He's like, "Bless me." When Romeo's showing up here because it's so early in the morning, and Friar's saying like, either you haven't been asleep all night, or maybe worse yet, maybe you were up all night with somebody and you're not married. That's not appropriate. And we find out here that Friar knows about Rosaline. He says, "God pardon sin, was thou with Rosaline?" So he's like, I hope you didn't sin by doing something while you're not married. Romeo ends up saying, no, I've forgotten that name, and that name's woe. I'm going to pause here and continue in another video just because my time's running out here. So we'll pick up right where we left off there.